The fluorescent lights flickered overhead as Lyra dragged her mop across the metal floor. The corridor stretched before her, like a dull, silver snake, winding through the heart of Harmony Station. Her shoulders ached from hours of scrubbing stubborn stains, residue from last week's minor hull breach. Not that anyone noticed. The Earth Alliance officers marched past her daily, without so much as a nod of acknowledgement. Just another invisible janitor in the vast machinery of war. Lyra paused to wipe sweat from her brow, leaning against her mop. Through the viewport beside her, distant stars glittered against the void, beautiful and indifferent to the century of bloodshed between humans and the Zaroon. The observation deck, once a place where civilians marveled at cosmic wonders, now served as a tactical center. Star charts had been replaced by battle maps, and the ceiling-high windows were reinforced with blast shields that only retracted during system diagnostics. 100 years of war had transformed everything. "Section B7 still needs cleaning," crackled a voice through her communicator. "Commander Hayes wants it spotless for tomorrow's inspection." "Copy that," Lyra sighed, adjusting her gray maintenance uniform. "On my way." She gathered her supplies and shuffled toward the service elevator. The station's internal announcement system chimed, followed by the day's casualty report from the front lines. Lyra had stopped listening to the numbers months ago. They blurred together into a meaningless stream of data that did nothing but hollow out her chest. 27 family members lost to this war. 27 faces she'd never see again. The service elevator groaned as it descended to B7, the diplomatic sector that hadn't hosted actual diplomacy since before Lyra was born. Now it served as high-security holding cells for the rare occasions when the Alliance captured high-value Zaroon prisoners. As the elevator doors slid open, Lyra immediately sensed something different. The normally quiet corridor buzzed with activity. Alliance guards in full tactical gear rushed past her, barely avoiding collision. Their faces were tight with tension, a sharp contrast to their usual bored expressions. "Stand back, maintenance," barked a sergeant. "Secure prisoner transport in progress." Lyra pressed herself against the wall, clutching her cleaning cart. Down the corridor, a heavily armed escort approached. In their midst, towering above the human guards despite being hunched in restraints, was a Zaroon. Not just any Zaroon. Even Lyra recognized the distinct violet crest and ceremonial facial markings of a high-ranking military commander. Blood, deep indigo rather than red, seeped through makeshift bandages wrapped around his torso. One of his forearms hung at an unnatural angle. A captured general. As the procession passed, the alien's eyes, all four of them, arranged in a diamond pattern, locked onto Lyra's. Unlike the hateful glares she'd seen in propaganda broadcasts, his gaze held something unexpected: exhaustion. The same bone-deep weariness she saw in her own reflection each morning. For a fraction of a second, something passed between them, a flicker of recognition, not of faces, but of shared fatigue. Then the moment broke as guards shoved the prisoner forward, disappearing around the corner toward the high-security detention area. "What are you staring at?" The voice belonged to Carson, another maintenance worker who'd been stationed on Harmony for nearly 15 years. "Never seen a forearms before?" "Not this close," Lyra admitted, still shaken by the encounter. Carson snorted. "Well, get used to it. Word is that's General Ahrak himself, the butcher of Proxima Centauri. They say he's responsible for at least 30,000 Alliance deaths." The name sent a chill through Lyra. Everyone knew about General Ahrak. His tactical genius had extended the war by decades. According to military analysts, his forces had destroyed 3 Earth colonies and countless ships. He was the bogeyman parents used to frighten children into obedience. "Why bring him here?" Lyra asked. "Shouldn't he be at Alliance headquarters?" "Too risky to transport him that far. Besides," Carson lowered his voice, "rumor has it they want to extract tactical information quickly. This station's remote enough that they can use enhanced methods. Torture. The unspoken word hung between them. Anyway, Carson continued, checking his work tablet. Guess who's been assigned to clean the prisoners' quarters? Lyra's stomach dropped. No! Orders just came through. Daily maintenance of cell block D9. Effective immediately. Carson didn't bother hiding his amusement. Don't worry. He'll be restrained during your visits. Probably. Lyra gripped her mop handle tighter. I should report to Commander Hayes. Already approved at the highest level. They want someone unimportant handling the routine stuff. Someone. He gestured vaguely at her uniform. Expendable. The word stung, but Lyra had long accepted her place in the station's hierarchy. Still, cleaning the cell of the Alliance's most hated enemy wasn't part of her job description. I'll need different security clearance, she said. Carson handed her a new ID badge. Already taken care of. Report to D9 at 600 tomorrow. And Lyra. His expression hardened. Remember what they are. What they did to your family on Europa. Don't let those eyes fool you. They're not like us. They don't feel like we do. Lyra nodded automatically, but the general's exhausted gaze lingered in her memory, challenging Carson's words. That night, sleep eluded her. In her tiny quarters, little more than a converted storage closet, Lyra stared at the ceiling, remembering the refugee camp where she'd spent her childhood after the Zaroon bombardment of Europa. The overcrowded shelters, the food shortages, the nightmares that still occasionally woke her, screaming as phantom missiles rained from the sky. By all rights, she should hate the alien prisoner, should want him to suffer for the pain his kind had inflicted. Yet when she closed her eyes, all she could see was that moment of connection in the hallway, the universal language of weariness that transcended species. Morning came too quickly. Lyra dressed mechanically and made her way to the high-security section, each step heavier than the last. 2 guards flanked the entrance to cell block D9, their expressions impassive as they scanned her new credentials. Arms out, one ordered, running a security wand over her body. The prisoner will be secured to the far wall during your maintenance. Do not approach within 2 meters. Do not speak unless spoken to. If he makes any threatening movements, press this. He handed her a small panic button. Clear? Clear, Lyra echoed, her mouth dry. The cell door hissed open, revealing a stark chamber with nothing but a sleep platform, a waste reclamation unit, and a small table bolted to the floor. General Ahrak sat cross-legged on the platform, 3 of his 4 arms bound by energy restraints to the wall behind him. The 4th, the injured one, was splinted and bandaged, but free of restraints. His violet crest had dulled overnight, and fresh bruises darkened the scaled skin around his eye cluster. Interrogation had already begun. Then, Lyra wheeled her cleaning cart inside, keeping her eyes down as the door sealed behind her. The cell's air felt thick with tension. She methodically began her work, starting with the furthest corner from the prisoner, hyper-aware of his gaze following her movements. 10 minutes passed in silence before he spoke. You were in the corridor yesterday. His voice was deeper than she expected, with a strange harmonic quality, as though 2 voices spoke simultaneously. His command of English was perfect, though the words seemed to form oddly around his tripartite mouth. Lyra froze, remembering the guard's instructions not to engage. But something about being directly addressed made ignoring him seem more dangerous than responding. Yes, she said simply, continuing to scrub the floor. Another long silence followed. Then, your cleaning solution smells like the flowering vines that grow on Zaroon mountain temples. The unexpected observation startled her into looking up. The general wasn't watching her with hostility or calculation, but with what appeared to be genuine interest. It's standard issue, Lyra said cautiously. Lemon-scented. Lemon, he repeated, as though memorizing the word. We have no equivalent. Our world has different biochemistry. Lyra had never considered that aliens might find human sense noteworthy. It was such a mundane detail amid the grandeur of interstellar conflict, the kind of small observation that humanized the other. She caught herself. This was dangerous thinking. He wasn't human. He was the enemy. "I should finish my work," she said, turning away. The general made a sound, a soft click followed by a sigh. "Of course, I did not mean to delay your duties." The politeness in his tone was disarming. Lyra found herself stealing glances as she worked, noting details that propaganda images never showed. The way his secondary arms were slightly smaller than his primary set. The intricate patterns on his crest that seemed to shift color slightly with his breathing. The careful way he held his injured limb. As she gathered her supplies to leave, he spoke again. "May I know what to call you?" Every instinct warned against giving her name to the enemy. Yet the question seemed born of genuine courtesy, rather than tactical advantage. "Lyra," she said, against her better judgment. He dipped his head in what she recognized as a gesture of acknowledgement. "I am called Arak." "I know who you are," she replied, unable to keep a hard edge from her voice. All four eyes blinked in unison, a disconcerting sight. "You know what they say I am," he corrected gently. "That is not the same thing." Before she could respond, the cell door opened, and two security officers entered. One glared at Lyra. "Maintenance complete?" he snapped. "Yes, sir," she said, pushing her cart toward the exit. As she left, she heard the unmistakable sound of a shock baton activating behind her. She didn't look back, but the general's words echoed in her mind. "You know what they say I am. That is not the same thing." The next day, Lyra returned to find General Arak in worse condition. New wounds marked his torso, and his breathing seemed labored. The interrogation was intensifying. Still, he acknowledged her with the same respectful head dip when she entered. Lyra worked silently. But each time she glanced his way, she found him watching her with that same curious, non-threatening gaze. It was becoming harder to reconcile this prisoner with the monster described in Alliance broadcasts. On the third day, she found him barely conscious, slumped against his restraints. Dried indigo blood caked the floor beneath him. The sight provoked an unexpected surge of anger within her. This wasn't intelligence gathering. It was cruelty for its own sake. Without thinking, she soaked a cleaning cloth in cool water and approached him, stopping just short of the 2-meter boundary. "Can you hear me?" she asked quietly. His eye cluster opened slowly, focusing with visible effort. "Lyra," he murmured, her name sounding strange through his alien vocal structures. "You need water," she said, glancing at the empty hydration unit in the corner. "They believe dehydration will make me more cooperative." A weak clicking sound followed. She realized it might be his species' equivalent of a humorless laugh. Lyra looked at the security camera in the corner. According to Carson, the system only recorded visual data, not audio, to save on storage capacity. Still, she kept her voice low. "What do they want from you?" Ahrak's crest fluttered weakly. "The location of our remaining fleet, attack strategies, weaknesses in our planetary defenses." He shifted, wincing. "Information I cannot give, even if I wish to." "Because you're loyal to your people," Lyra said, understanding. "Because I do not know," he corrected. "I was relieved of command 3 lunar cycles ago. My final mission was—" He paused, seeming to search for words. "What you might call a suicide mission. I was not expected to return." Lyra frowned. "But you're their top general." "I was," he emphasized, "until I began advocating for peace negotiations." The revelation stunned her. Nothing in Alliance intelligence suggested divisions within the Zaroon leadership, much less a high-ranking officer supporting peace. "You wanted to end the war?" she asked incredulously. "A century of bloodshed is enough," he said simply. "Neither side remembers why we began fighting. We destroy each other over inherited hatreds, not present grievances. His words resonated with thoughts Lyra had harbored, but never dared express. How many times had she questioned what they were all fighting for? What victory would even look like after so much destruction? She glanced again at the camera, then made a decision. Moving quickly, she retrieved her water bottle from her cart and approached Arak, crossing the forbidden 2-meter boundary. "Drink," she whispered, holding the bottle to his mouth. Slowly. He looked at her with surprise but accepted the offering, drinking carefully through his unusual mouth structure. When he finished, gratitude shone in all 4 eyes. "Why risk helping me?" he asked. Lyra replaced the bottle in her cart. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe because you're right. 100 years is enough." As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Your grandmother's name was Alara." Lyra froze. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because I was there," he said quietly. "On Europa. I commanded the 3rd Fleet during that campaign." Cold dread washed over her. This creature had orchestrated the attack that killed most of her family, that sent her parents fleeing with nothing but the clothes on their backs. "I found her identification among the ruins," he continued. "She was a botanist. Her research center was not a military target, but it was destroyed by an orbital strike that strayed off course." Lyra's hands trembled with sudden rage. "And you're telling me this why? To confess your sins?" "To tell you that I returned to the center after the bombardment. I found survivors, 17 humans, including a child. I evacuated them to a secure location before Alliance forces arrived." His voice grew softer. The child wore a bracelet. It bore the name Lyra. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Memories flashed through her mind, confused images she'd attributed to childhood trauma, being carried in strange, multiple arms. A voice with that same harmonic quality telling her she was safe now. "That's not possible," she whispered. "You're lying." "The bracelet was copper, with small blue stones," Ahrak said. "You were clutching a stuffed animal, a gray creature with long ears." "A rabbit," Lyra said automatically, her mouth dry. The details were too specific to be fabricated. The bracelet had been her grandmother's gift. The rabbit, lost in the evacuation, had been her most treasured possession. "Why would you save human children? We're your enemy." Ahrak's crest drooped. "Children are never the enemy. And that day I began to question everything we had been told about humans. About the war itself." The cell door slid open before Lyra could respond. Commander Hayes himself stood in the doorway, his cold eyes taking in the scene. "Maintenance worker," he barked. "You're too close to the prisoner. Step back immediately." Lyra hurried to her cart, heart pounding. "Sorry, sir. I was cleaning a difficult spot." Hayes studied her suspiciously, but seemed to accept the explanation. "Finish up and get out. The prisoner has another session scheduled." Ahrak's body tensed visibly at these words, but his expression remained dignified. As Lyra wheeled her cart toward the exit, he caught her eye one last time. In that moment, she made a silent promise to return. Days passed, and Lyra's visits to Ahrak's cell became the strangest kind of ritual. She would clean efficiently, and they would exchange brief, careful conversations whenever the guards weren't present. She smuggled in extra water and occasionally small amounts of food, hiding them where the cameras couldn't see. Through these stolen moments, a picture emerged of a being very different from the monster portrayed in Alliance propaganda. Ahrak spoke of his homeworld with poetic reverence, its floating cities and bioluminescent forests. He described Zarun music, performed with instruments that required 4 arms to play properly. He asked countless questions about Earth and human customs, genuinely curious about the species he'd fought for decades. Most surprisingly, he shared his growing disillusionment with the war, how he'd begun to suspect both sides were being manipulated to continue fighting long after any meaningful objectives had been achieved. "There are forces that profit from our conflict," he explained one day, voice barely above a whisper. Arms manufacturers, resource speculators, political leaders who maintain power through fear. On both sides, Lyra asked. War is the ultimate symbiotic relationship, Ahrak replied. Enemies need each other to justify their existence. These conversations changed something fundamental in Lyra's understanding of the conflict that had shaped her entire life. If Ahrak, the supposed butcher of Proxima Centauri, could question the war's purpose, what did that say about the narratives she'd accepted without question? Outside the cell, life on the station continued. Lyra performed her regular duties, but her mind remained in that small room with the alien prisoner. She began researching the war's history in the station's archives, looking for inconsistencies in the official record. What she found disturbed her. Diplomatic communications that had been mistranslated, possibly deliberately. Peace overtures from the Zaroon that never reached Alliance leadership. Civilian casualty numbers that had been exaggerated or minimized depending on which side was responsible. Meanwhile, Carson had begun watching her with suspicious eyes. You're spending an awful lot of time cleaning that cell, he remarked one day in the mess hall. Making friends with the forearms? Just doing my job, Lyra replied, focusing on her food. Right, Carson said skeptically. Just remember what they are, what he is. Don't let that smooth talk fool you. But it was too late for such warnings. The more Lyra learned about Ahrak and about the war itself, the harder it became to maintain the clear divisions between us and them that had defined her worldview. Then came the day everything changed. Lyra arrived for her regular cleaning shift to find two high-ranking officers outside Ahrak's cell. Through the small window in the door, she could see the general kneeling on the floor, surrounded by guards with shock batons. What's happening? She asked a nearby security officer. Execution order came through this morning, he replied dispassionately. The brass finally gave up on getting any useful intel from him. Scheduled for 0800 tomorrow. Horror flooded through Lyra. On whose authority? Alliance High Command. Signed by Admiral Chen himself. Something about making an example. The officer shrugged. Not my business. Just following orders. Lyra's mind raced. There was no Admiral Chen in Alliance High Command. She had reviewed the command structure thoroughly during her research. Something was very wrong. She retreated to her quarters, heart pounding. If the execution order was falsified, who was behind it? And more importantly, how could she stop it? Throughout the night, Lyra pored over station schematics and security protocols, looking for any way to intervene. By morning, she had formulated a desperate, probably suicidal plan. At 0730, she reported for an unscheduled cleaning assignment in cell block D9, claiming Commander Hayes had ordered additional sanitation before the special procedure. The guards, accustomed to her regular presence, waved her through with minimal verification. Inside, Ahrak sat in meditative silence, his posture reflecting dignity rather than fear. All four eyes opened when Lyra entered. You shouldn't be here, he said softly. The execution order is fake, she whispered urgently, pretending to clean the area nearest him. There's no Admiral Chen in Alliance Command. Ahrak's crest rippled with surprise. Are you certain? Positive. Someone wants you dead before you can be properly processed or exchanged. Lyra glanced at the camera. I think it's the same forces you mentioned, the ones profiting from the war. Understanding dawned in Ahrak's expression. If I die here, my death would be blamed on Alliance brutality. It would inflame the Zaroon military, prevent any peace faction from gaining traction. Exactly, Lyra nodded. And if your people retaliated, it would silence peace advocates on our side too. For a moment, they stared at each other, the full implications sinking in. They were pawns in a game designed to ensure the war continued indefinitely. I need to get you out of here, Lyra said, the words sounding impossible, even as she spoke them. Ahrak shook his head. Even if you could release me from these restraints, the station is filled with Alliance personnel. We would never reach a transport. We don't need to escape, Lyra countered. We just need to be seen, to expose the deception. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside, the execution detail arriving early. Panic surged through Lyra as the door began to slide open. In that moment, operating on instinct rather than rational thought, she lunged forward and did the unthinkable. She hugged General Ahrak, her arms wrapped around his massive torso, her face pressed against his scaled chest. She felt him stiffen in shock, heard his strange heart beating at a rhythm utterly unlike a human's. The door finished opening. 6 Alliance officers stood frozen in the entrance, staring at the incomprehensible tableau before them. A human janitor embracing the Alliance's most hated enemy. "Stand down, maintenance worker," shouted the lead officer, drawing his sidearm. "Step away from the prisoner immediately." Lyra held tighter, turning to face them but not releasing her grip on Ahrak. "This execution is unauthorized," she called out. "Check the order. It's signed by an Admiral Chen who doesn't exist." Confusion flickered across the officers' faces. Behind them, more personnel gathered, drawn by the commotion. "This is some kind of trick," the officer insisted, though with less certainty. "Verify the order," Lyra demanded. "Call Alliance headquarters directly." A tense standoff ensued, with weapons trained on both Lyra and Ahrak. Finally, Commander Hayes pushed through the crowd, his face contorted with anger. "What the hell is going on here?" he demanded. "Sir," Lyra said, still not releasing Ahrak, "the execution order is fraudulent. There is no Admiral Chen in the command structure." Hayes narrowed his eyes. "That's absurd. I saw the order myself." "Then verify it, sir," she challenged. "Contact headquarters while everyone is watching." Something in her tone, the absolute certainty, gave Hayes pause. After a moment's hesitation, he activated his comm unit. "This is Commander Hayes on Harmony Station. I need to confirm execution order 347B for prisoner Ahrak of the Zaroon." He paused, listening to the response, his expression gradually shifting from confidence to confusion to alarm. "No such order was issued?" he repeated. "I see. Yes, sir. Understood, sir." He deactivated the comm and stared at Lyra and Ahrak with new eyes. "How did you know?" "Because General Ahrak was right," Lyra said, finally releasing her hold, but standing protectively beside the alien. "There are forces manipulating both sides to perpetuate this war." The room erupted in chaos. Accusations, denials, arguments. In the midst of it all, Ahrak's voice cut through the din. "If I may," he said, his harmonic tones commanding attention despite his prisoner status. "I believe we have been granted a unique opportunity, a human and a Zaroon, standing together against deception rather than against each other." The room quieted, all eyes on the improbable pair. "I propose," Ahrak continued, "that this station, named Harmony, in what must have been either bitter irony or fading hope, become the site of the first true diplomatic exchange between our peoples in a century." Commander Hayes looked uncertain. "I don't have the authority." "Then request it," Lyra interrupted. "Tell them what happened here. Tell them a janitor and a prisoner uncovered a conspiracy to prolong the war. Tell them we have a chance to end 100 years of bloodshed." For a long moment, Hayes studied them both. Then, with a decisive nod, he turned to his officers. "Secure the prisoner, comfortably, in the diplomatic suite. Post guards, but treat him as an envoy, not a criminal. And get me a direct line to Alliance headquarters, Priority Alpha." As Ahrak was led away, he turned back to Lyra. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded, suddenly exhausted but filled with a strange, buoyant hope. 100 years is enough, she echoed his words from days earlier. The events that followed would later be dissected by historians, analyzed by political scientists, and mythologized in popular culture. The Harmony Accord, as it came to be known, began with the most unlikely of diplomatic gestures: a hug between supposed enemies. Alliance headquarters, initially skeptical, sent a diplomatic team to interview both Lyra and Ahrak. Their testimony, along with the evidence of the falsified execution order, prompted a formal investigation that ultimately exposed a network of weapons manufacturers and political operatives who had systematically sabotaged peace efforts for decades. More remarkably, the Zaroon leadership, upon learning that one of their most celebrated generals had been spared by human intervention, sent their own diplomatic delegation. For the first time in living memory, representatives of both species sat at the same table without weapons between them. Progress was neither smooth nor swift. Centuries of mistrust could not be erased by a single act, no matter how symbolic. The first meetings were tense, filled with recriminations and painful historical accounts from both sides. Yet, something fundamental had shifted. The narrative of inevitable, perpetual conflict had been disrupted. Questions were being asked that had long been suppressed. What if the enemy wasn't as monstrous as portrayed? What if coexistence was possible? What if a century of war had been, at its core, a monumental misunderstanding inflamed by those who profited from continued hostility? Through it all, Lyra found herself unexpectedly central to the proceedings. No longer invisible, the janitor who hugged an alien became a symbol of the human capacity for compassion beyond boundaries. She was called upon to share her story with delegations from both sides, to explain what had compelled her to set aside inherited hatred in favor of a chance at understanding. "I saw a person," she would tell them simply. "Not a monster, not an alien, not an enemy. Just someone as tired of fighting as I was." Ahrak, too, became an unlikely ambassador, released from prisoner status but unable to return to his people until negotiations advanced. He remained on Harmony Station, working alongside the diplomatic teams. His unique perspective, as both a former military leader and an advocate for peace, proved invaluable in bridging the vast cultural divides. 6 months after the hug that stopped a war, as media outlets had taken to calling it, Lyra stood beside Ahrak on the observation deck, watching as the blast shields retracted fully for the first time in decades. Stars stretched before them, no longer battlefield markers but simply celestial wonders. "Do you think it will last?" Lyra asked quietly. "The peace, I mean—" Ahrak's crest shifted in the thoughtful pattern she had come to recognize. "Peace is not a destination but a path," he said. "One we choose to walk each day, despite the difficulties." "Poetic," Lyra smiled. "I have been reading your Earth literature," he admitted. "Your species has much wisdom about war and peace. You have fought yourselves even more than you have fought us." "Not our finest quality," Lyra acknowledged. "Yet you also possess extraordinary capacity for reconciliation," Ahrak countered. "For forgiveness. It is not as common among the Zaroon. We have much to learn from each other." A comfortable silence fell between them as they contemplated the stars. So much had changed, yet much remained uncertain. The formal peace treaty was still under negotiation. Hardliners on both sides continued to resist. The complex web of economic and political interests that had sustained the war would not unravel easily. But for the first time in a century, possibility existed, where before there had been only endless conflict. "I never asked you," Lyra said suddenly. "About that day on Europa? Why did you save those children? Save me? It went against everything your military stood for." Ahrak was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of memory. "I had never seen human children before that day," he said. "In our military briefings, humans were depicted as uniformly aggressive, cunning, dangerous. But there you were, small, frightened, clutching your toy. You looked at me with such terror, yet also hope, as though you still believed someone would help you, even as your world burned around you. He turned all four eyes to her. In that moment, I saw what the war had made me become, what we had all become, Zaroon and human alike, and I could not bear it. Lyra reached out hesitantly, placing her hand on one of his lower arms, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Thank you," she said, "for saving me then, and for helping save us all now." Ahrak made the clicking sound she now recognized as his species' equivalent of emotional acknowledgement. Perhaps that is the true victory, not defeating the enemy, but recognizing we need not be enemies at all. Their conversation was interrupted by Commander Hayes, who approached with an uncharacteristic smile. "It's official," he announced. "The ceasefire has been extended indefinitely. Full peace negotiations will begin next month on neutral territory." The news rippled through the observation deck, where other station personnel had gathered. Someone began to applaud, and soon the sound swelled, echoing off the metal walls and ceiling-high windows. In the midst of the celebration, Lyra found herself studying the faces around her, humans who had dedicated their lives to fighting the Zaroon, now cautiously embracing the possibility of peace. Change was coming, not in a single transformative moment, but in these small, accumulating shifts of perspective. 1 year to the day after Lyra first encountered General Ahrak in the corridor, Harmony Station hosted the formal signing of the preliminary peace accord. The ceremony, broadcast throughout human and Zaroon territories, took place on the refurbished observation deck. Behind the dignitaries, stars shone unobscured by blast shields, symbolic of the new openness between once implacable foes. Lyra, dressed in formal attire rather than her maintenance uniform, stood to one side of the proceedings. No longer a janitor, she had been appointed as a special liaison to the Joint Cultural Exchange Program, an initiative to begin the long process of helping both species understand each other beyond military encounters. As the Alliance President and the Zaroon High Counselor signed the historic document, Lyra caught Ahrak's eye across the room. The former general, now his people's chief diplomatic representative, inclined his crest in that familiar gesture of acknowledgement. So much remained to be done. A century of hatred would not dissolve overnight. There would be setbacks, resistance, perhaps even violence from those unable to imagine a different future. The economic systems built around warfare would need to be dismantled and repurposed. Countless personal and collective traumas would require healing. Yet, standing there, watching former enemies clasp hands, and in the Zaroon case, multiple hands, in tentative friendship, Lyra felt the weight of possibility. The endless war that had defined her existence, that had shaped the lives of multiple generations, was ending not with triumph or defeat, but with the shared recognition of a simple truth: enough was enough. After the ceremony, as the dignitaries dispersed for the reception, Lyra found a quiet moment alone by the viewport. The distant stars seemed different now, not cold and indifferent as they had once appeared, but alive with potential. A familiar harmonic voice spoke behind her. "They are naming a peace scholarship after you," Ahrak said, moving to stand beside her. "For young humans and Zaroon to study together." Lyra shook her head, embarrassed. "I just cleaned floors and hugged someone who needed it. The real work was done by the diplomats and leaders." "No," Ahrak said firmly. "The real work was done in that cell, when one being chose to see another as worthy of compassion, despite every cultural force demanding hatred." His crest rippled with emotion. "When you embraced me, an act unprecedented in our species' interactions, you demonstrated the courage that leaders and diplomats often lack." Before Lyra could respond, they were interrupted by a young communications officer. "Excuse me," she said, clearly nervous about approaching the imposing Zaroon diplomat. The first joint transmission is ready to broadcast. Sir, they're waiting for you both. Lyra and Ahrak followed her to the communications center, where a joint human-Zarun media team had established a broadcast station. As architects of what was now being called the Harmony Doctrine, they had been asked to deliver a message to both civilizations, a symbol of the new relationship being forged. Standing before the camera, side by side with the being who had once embodied everything she feared, Lyra felt a strange sense of completion. The circle that had begun on Europa with a frightened child and a questioning general had come full course. When the transmission light blinked on, she didn't recite the carefully prepared statement they had been given. Instead, she spoke from the heart. "I was born into war," she said simply, "as were my parents, and their parents before them. We accepted conflict as inevitable, the natural state of relations between our peoples. We built our societies around it, justified countless sacrifices for it, and never questioned whether it could be otherwise." She glanced at Ahrak, who nodded encouragingly. "But war is not our natural state," she continued. "It is a failure of imagination, an inability to see beyond our differences to our shared capacity for compassion, for understanding, for growth. Today, we choose a different path, not because we have forgotten the past, but because we refuse to let it determine our future." Ahrak stepped forward, his harmonic voice blending with hers in a powerful symbolic duet. "We invite you to join us," he said, "not in erasing a century of painful history, but in writing a new chapter together, one where we approach each other not as inevitable enemies, but as potential allies in facing the true challenges that confront all sentient beings, the mysteries of the universe, the limitations of our knowledge, the fragility of the worlds we inhabit." As they spoke, the camera captured the image that would become iconic throughout both civilizations: a human and a Zarun standing together, neither dominating nor submitting, but meeting as equals in the shared light of distant stars. 5 years passed, throughout human and Zarun territories. The anniversary of the Harmony Accord was marked with joint ceremonies, cultural exchanges, and educational initiatives, though tensions remained in some regions, and hardliners on both sides continued to resist integration. The momentum toward peace had become self-sustaining. Lyra stood on the newly constructed Memorial Plaza on what had once been a battlefield on Proxima Centauri 4. Behind her, the monument rose toward the alien sky, a towering sculpture of intertwined human and Zarun hands, crafted from metals contributed by both civilizations. At the base of the monument, names were inscribed, millions of them, representing those lost during the century-long conflict. Among them, Lyra had found her grandmother's name, Alara, carefully etched alongside countless others. "Does it bring closure?" asked Ahrak, who had accompanied her for this personal pilgrimage. In the years since their first encounter, he had become something more than a colleague, more than a friend, a partner in the ongoing work of peace-building that had become their shared purpose. "Not closure," Lyra replied, touching the cool metal of the monument, "but perhaps perspective. They died in conflict, but they're remembered in peace. There's meaning in that transformation." A gentle breeze rustled through the memorial garden, carrying the scent of both earth flowers and Zarun blossoms, planted side by side in a deliberate symbol of coexistence. Children's voices echoed from a nearby educational center, human and Zarun youngsters participating in a joint cultural program. Lyra smiled at the sound. These children would be the first generation in over a century to grow up without the shadow of interspecies war hanging over them. They would know each other not primarily as enemies, but as different forms of life, sharing the same stretch of galaxy. "We have much yet to accomplish," Ahrak said, his crest shifting in the pattern of thoughtful determination she had come to know so well. "We do," Lyra agreed. "But today, let's acknowledge how far we've come. They stood in companionable silence, watching as the twin suns of Proxima Centauri began their descent toward the horizon. Soon, stars would appear, the same stars that had witnessed a century of conflict and now observed its gradual resolution. As darkness fell, small lights illuminated the memorial, casting the intertwined sculptural hands in a warm glow. Other visitors moved quietly through the space, paying respects to fallen ancestors or simply contemplating the monument's message. A group of Zaroon elders approached, recognizing Arak. They greeted him with traditional gestures of respect, then turned to Lyra and offered the same courtesy, an unthinkable occurrence just a few years earlier. "You are the one they call the Peacemaker," said the eldest, her crest faded with age. "The human who embraced our kind when others would not." Lyra shook her head modestly. "I was just a janitor who saw beyond the uniform and the species." "Sometimes," the elder replied. "That is all peace requires. Eyes that see truly, and arms willing to embrace difference." As the elders moved on, Lyra and Arak began walking toward the shuttle that would return them to the orbital station. Their work would continue. There were trade agreements to negotiate, cultural exchanges to facilitate, educational programs to develop. The path of peace required constant tending, like any living thing. Yet, in this moment, beneath the emerging stars of a once contested world, Lyra felt a profound sense of rightness. The war that had defined her existence, that had claimed her family and shaped her identity, had ended not with triumph or surrender, but with recognition. Recognition that beneath the profound differences of biology, culture, and history lay a shared capacity for connection. She had been just a janitor, tasked with cleaning the remnants of conflict. Instead, she had helped clear the way for something new to grow. As they reached the shuttle, Lyra paused to look back at the monument one last time. Its lights glowed against the deepening dusk, a beacon of possibility in the gathering darkness. Not an end, but a beginning. "Ready?" Arak asked, all four eyes reflecting the starlight. Lyra nodded, stepping into the future they had helped create. "Ready,"